All right, great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you again for attending today. We have a great session with our partner Novus, and Ryan Lawless from NFP and Tango is actually going to kick it off and just give you a little update on where we're at with Tango. So take it away, Ryan.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you, everybody. My name is Ryan Lawless. I'm a senior consultant with NFP and have been part of Tango now going on 10 years. We flip the slide. So Tango, the Alliance for Nonprofit Growth and Opportunity, what we do is really look to build a bridge between socially conscious businesses and nonprofits that benefit everybody involved. We look to drive innovation from both our partners and our nonprofit members with the ultimate goal of creating cost savings and also better equipping our nonprofit members to meet their mission. Currently, we have over 1,500 nonprofit members. We have 170,000 employees represented in the nonprofit sector. We have 32 socially responsive partners, Novus, of course, being one of those partners. We host over 50 events a year. And to this date, we've also granted 4 scholarships, which I'll touch on a little bit further as we move forward. Next slide, please, Greg. Our impact really falls in kind of 3 main areas. The first is professional development and collaboration. Workshops like you're attending today are a big part of what we do, where our partners will lend you their intellectual capital to help you, drive better results in your organization. So training is something that nonprofits have cut out of their budget over the last several years, going on a long time, actually. So we try to bring you some of that training, and there's no cost to our sessions to help you network and get to know people, both in the business community, but also within other nonprofits that you can lean on. Again, the ultimate goal is to make nonprofits better. Preferred services from nonprofit specialists. These are our partners who have developed preferred programs, again, share their expertise and their intellectual capital with you, and then customize solutions to fit your nonprofit that can ultimately help you save money. And then goodwill and mission support. The Tango Donation Depot is a place where businesses can donate office equipment. If they're upgrading their office chairs or their phone systems, they can donate the old systems and chairs. And then we give those out to nonprofits for free. It's a great program. The Tango Foundation, we continue to raise money and give out scholarships to what we call our rising stars in the nonprofit sector. These are individuals that have been identified by their organizations as those that can grow into bigger positions within the organization, but maybe they lack a little bit of training or education. So we supply them money to further that education, further their training, so they can move into those leadership roles. And then we have several DEI initiatives that are going on. Currently, we are working with a couple of Fortune 100 companies where we are training their diverse individuals on their staff for board service in the nonprofit sector. So this is our nonprofit mission support. Next slide, Greg. So Tango is free for our nonprofit members to join. Our partners do pay an annual fee to be part of the family. And I think all of you on this call will agree with this, because you have not been hounded by phone calls from our partners. We do it in a very tactful way. Ultimately, the goal of any business is to grow their business. What we try to do is do it the right way, by working with the nonprofit organizations, sharing our intellectual capital, working with all organizations, not just our clients, but also other organizations, with the ultimate goal that if and when the time comes for you to make a change in a professional relationship or add something to your organization that requires a professional relationship, that you do look to Tango first and give that Tango partner the opportunity to earn your trust and earn your business. Next slide, Greg. So NFP is the founder was Schuster Group, who's now NFP, kind of the main fiscal sponsor of Tango. And our area of expertise is in the health and benefits insurance. We've developed several programs that nonprofits can take advantage of on all of these areas of expertise: benefits, property casualty, and then wealth and retirement planning. Next slide, Greg. And then last but not least, our Building Bridges event is coming up on November 2nd at the AquaTurf. This is an in-person event. We've had great reviews. It's been a couple of years since we've done in person, but prior to COVID, we've had great reviews on this event. If you can make it, please join us. Please let other people within your organization know. We kind of touch on all disciplines at the conference. So, really anybody in your organization can benefit from attending. It is free to attend. So please pass this along to your organization. And Rob, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, it's a great day, full of education. You can network with other nonprofit leaders. We have great guest speakers. So once again, as Ryan said, it is complimentary to all of you as Tango members and your staff. So feel free to register right online at our website, tangoalliance.org, and we definitely hope to see you next week. So thanks again, Ryan. And with that said, let's turn it over to Greg and the Novus team for the main presentation.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Rob. Good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Bugbee. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Novus Insight, and today we're here to talk a little bit about data management and efforts in nonprofit data management that often end in failure. We've seen over the years, consulting with nonprofit organizations, many attempts to try and organize data, and nonprofits often look to technology to assist with doing that. And oftentimes there's problems in looking to tech as the solution. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to reverse course, select the right technology, build the right processes around technology, and improve our data management at the nonprofit level. So presenters today, myself, Greg Bugbee, I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Novus Insight, and I'm joined with Herbert Lietzer, who is the Director of Data Services at Novus. Together, we'll be presenting on this topic. A little bit about Novus. We are a technology consulting firm out of East Hartford, Connecticut, and we are working primarily with schools, municipalities, and nonprofits to assist them with data management, cybersecurity, IT infrastructure, and managed services, as well as automating business processes. So today's focus is going to be managing your most important data as a nonprofit. And when we're talking about your most important data as a nonprofit, we're not talking about the holiday potluck list. We're talking about all of the data that you use as a nonprofit for fundraising, for your direct services to individuals, all of the data that's important to your organization, whether it be client data, financial data, employee data. And I tell you what, when we talk about nonprofit data, nonprofits are actually in a very, very challenging situation as compared to many corporations. Many corporations are in a position where they are actually reporting on the bottom line to individuals, such as board members. Nonprofits, on the other hand, have to provide extensive amounts of detail to their board members, to funders, to the community, and to other interested parties. And when we look at the amount of detail that's contained in nonprofit data, it's overwhelming. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we can unburden ourselves from the pain points that are associated with nonprofit data collection, nonprofit data reporting, and all of the action items that happen with nonprofit data in between. So the nonprofit data dilemma, let's take a closer look at this over here. When we look at the nonprofit struggles, nonprofits struggle with data collection. Oftentimes our collection strategies are informed by working with funders, and the funders are saying, hey, we want to collect this data, and we want you to provide us back this data on how many individuals you're serving. Let's look at where those individuals are from. What are their demographics? And you have to collect a lot of data based upon funder needs. What that does, though, is you also have your mission needs and you have your own internal needs. All of that aggregate of all of that, the different data types result in a collection process that is often very, very unwieldy and sometimes the collection process can get to the point where it's not very trauma informed or repetitive in some instances. We've been working with nonprofits on several occasions where individuals who have gone through traumatic experiences have had to actually repeat multiple times the same questions on different forms because, well, this funder for this program has asked for it. And throughout their journey of service, we're seeing those same questions asked over and over again. Getting to the point where we can streamline that and reduce that burden on the individuals that we're serving is definitely a major goal. And we'll talk about how we can do that through a sound data strategy. Processing, aggregation of data, visualization, reporting, all of those areas are struggles. How many folks here on the call today, quick show of hands using Zoom, how many folks struggle with reporting to their funders? How big of a burden is that with you? Feel free to throw in the chat if reporting to your funders and reporting to your boards is a struggle that you deal with on a regular basis. I bet probably a good 95% of folks on this call struggle with reporting. And the other thing that happens is with security being a major issue as well. A lot of times we're dealing with personally identifiable data. We're dealing with all kinds of different data types with the people that we serve. Securing that data and ensuring that, you know, when we copy something out to make a report, that identifiable data isn't exposed. That's another very important goal of ours, is to protect the data of our constituents. So anyway, all of these challenges and struggles result in disconnect between information being collected and how it's intended to be used, bottlenecks, inefficiency, the lack of a big picture, the inability to gain a complete picture and measure impact across programs. This is especially true with organizations that have multiple programs. Administrative burdens, going to all of the different program areas and saying, can I get that report? I need this report. I need this information. That administrative time, or digging through spreadsheets. How many folks struggle with digging through tons of spreadsheets to find their data? The administrative burden of nonprofit reporting and data aggregation is substantial because of all the different disparate systems we use and the complexity of nonprofit organizations. And then when we put it all together and we cobble our data together from spreadsheets and such, we tend to look back at this and say, well, how sure are we of the accuracy of the data that we're working with? That's another issue over here too, is that we end up with the confidence issues with our data. So we want to make sure that the data that we have is accurate and helps those who are making decisions, whether it be about funding or executives within the organizations, how can they make better decisions? So that's a little bit about what we're referring to here. On the next slide over here, we're going to talk about kind of an evolution of data too. So nonprofit data lifecycle. This is probably familiar to many of you, where we're looking at intake. You know, often occurs through a system like Google Forms these days. And Google Forms is a glorified spreadsheet. And we'll talk a little bit about spreadsheet in a little bit over here. Isolated systems such as a donor management platform or a case management system. And then we move into this action area over here where we're dealing with that data that goes from a Google form to maybe a Google Sheet or a case management platform. And then it's stored somewhere. Maybe we have another spreadsheet where we pull that data out and we put it into a standalone system. As you can see over here, when we're talking about those individual programs such as direct service or fundraising, we have multiple systems and processes that are in use here. And then what happens here is this is on the direct service side or within that particular program area that we have these systems. When it comes to reporting, now the organization starts to look at this and say, how do I pull the data out of all of these different systems to make sense of it so that I can use it for a grant application? Maybe I want to do a dashboard for the executives, and I'm pulling that data possibly into another spreadsheet or into another platform to do that type of work. From there, we then have to do a report for our funders. And we say, okay, we're going to pull that out of the reporting system, put it into another spreadsheet, and then email it to somebody. So by the time we get to the point where we're trying to do a look back on this entire process, we may have 4 or 5 different data systems that have been involved in this process here. And it's really interesting when we start looking at nonprofit data management, all of the different systems and tools lead to a situation where it's difficult to even go back and say, 5 years from now, I want to grab this data and look at our trends. Well, we've had all of this data from spreadsheets. We don't know which one is the real one. And I kind of equate it to what we call data dumpster diving, where we're trying to cobble together data from all of these different systems and then do something with it. It's very, very challenging. And what we're trying to do with technology and process is solve that particular problem. So I want to talk a little bit about where we're at as well with spreadsheets. Spreadsheets become kind of the tool that we've often used in the past to move data and share data. And, it's kind of interesting. Excel has become kind of a default database for many organizations. Folks have adopted the next evolution of that, which is Google Sheets, and it's exciting, right? We can collaborate on our spreadsheet, but it's still a spreadsheet. And a spreadsheet is designed for organizing data, not as a database. And I think that that's a key point over here. One of the things that we're going to show you today is how we can evolve from spreadsheets into a data platform that'll help you escape this spreadsheet sprawl that we have over here. What's interesting about spreadsheets too is I was working with a nonprofit not too long ago, and the executive director said, I want to have visibility across all of my different parts of the organization. And she set on this course to go talk to the different departments and say, well, where do you store your data? Well, I have this spreadsheet, and this person within my department has this spreadsheet where they store stuff. And what happens is you end up with secret spreadsheets all over the place, and it doesn't work well. You have multiple copies of the data. You don't know which one's the real one. And really, overuse of spreadsheets is a very, very common theme in nonprofits. Data gets exported, it gets manipulated. So use a tool for like Microsoft Access or Microsoft Excel for what it's designed for, but then stop there. And spreadsheets really are great for kind of a one-time use, but it should not be your storage repository. It's very dangerous to do that, and you'll end up in spreadsheet sprawl and have a bunch of secret spreadsheets all over the place that you have to end up working with, and that's really a big challenge. If that sounds familiar, it probably is in most nonprofit organizations. Going to this next slide over here, we're going to talk a little bit about data collection, and then I'm going to turn things over to Herbert, who's going to do a little bit of sharing with us about data collection strategies. So data collection within organizations, we talked a little bit about using Google Forms and such for data collection, and that's what a lot of nonprofits have moved towards lately, is doing data collection through forms and different types of data systems. But data collection for a nonprofit really needs to be a strategic initiative where data is an asset to the organization. And we have to think about the concept of kind of garbage in and garbage out. If we're working on our data collection strategy and it doesn't align with our reporting strategy, we're going to have a disconnect where we don't have the right data. Example of this, I was working with a nonprofit once, and they weren't collecting full sets of demographic information. And they were collecting, however, driver's licenses as part of their intake process. So when a funder was asking for particular information, they would take a look at the driver's license and the picture of the person and make judgment calls on what ethnicity, what race that person was, and then they would go ahead and give that reporting to the funders instead of modifying their data collection process. That's not a good way to do your data collection process, and it's better to align that with your collection strategy. So put thought into how your data is collected. Another common theme with nonprofits is that we have these free text fields, narrative, it's very, very difficult to go ahead and pull data out of narrative text fields. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can streamline that process and make that process better. We're also going to understand what important options exist if information is coming from a third-party data source. So adding third-party data can really help tell your story when it comes to the mission of your organization. So there's a lot that we can consider with data collection, but it's very important to understand what are our goals? What do we want to accomplish with the data that we're collecting? Is it equitable? Is it trauma-informed? And make that part of our data strategy. So I'm going to pause right here and turn things over to Herbert, who's going to talk a little bit about a couple of examples of data collection and how data collection works for a particular use case. And with this particular use case, one of the things that we're also going to be looking at is data validation right at the collection point. So when we talk about validating data accuracy, this system that he's going to show you actually does validation during the data collection process to help determine eligibility and also other factors. So Herb, I'm going to turn things over to you and you can take it from here to showcase some data collection strategies.
Sounds good. All right. So before I go a little bit more into the dedicated example that I want to present today, I want to kind of tie into what Greg just brought up. You know, a lot of nonprofit clients, a lot of organizations collect information either, as mentioned before, via Google Sheets, sometimes via spreadsheets, right? Sometimes via forms that are just posted on websites that get collected by email, and then that data has to be transformed into an Excel spreadsheet. And you know, one of the problems that a lot of those collection methods have is they a lot of times don't contain the appropriate validation. You know, is a phone number, you know, in the correct format, or is it incomplete, for example? Is an email address actually an email address, or is it, you know, just a partial email address, and when you want to use it, it actually will fail? So all those problems, you know, can be obviously resolved in Excel potentially, or even on, you know, Google Sheets, but it requires a person to know a little bit more than the average user. In Google Sheets, it might be something, you know, that you need to code a little bit, which is not something that every administrator, you know, can do. In Excel, you know, it might be even more difficult because you have to work with specific, you know, form fields and formats that you can utilize, and they might not be. They might not be ideal to go on.
Sorry, Herbert, we just got a comment in. Could you maybe zoom in a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. So what I want to bring up here is, because for our example, and again, Greg mentioned this before, one of our clients, and we see this is kind of a representative of a lot of clients that we work with, Capital Workforce Partners. For about 6 or 7 years that we work with them, they are running the Summer Youth Employment Program. This is a program where certain providers offer, you know, summer youth employment, and Capital Workforce Partners is the agency that collects those applications. And previously, they used basically a glorified Google Sheets or a custom form where all that information was collected. They published a link on their public website, right? And you know, youth could go there, apply for a summer internship, for example. The problem there was, you know, this program would be recurring. So every year, you know, they would collect information, and the way they extracted the information was via Excel spreadsheets. So, you know, naturally you have spreadsheets for each year. There's, however, no common way how to, you know, get all the information out for all the previous years. So you basically have those silos of information. And on top of that was, you know, they got a lot of applications that didn't really qualify. Meaning, you know, sometimes people were too young, sometimes certain youth wasn't legally allowed to work in the United States. And what I'm going to show you here, what we can do is, what a good practice is, and Greg mentioned this before, is to, before we even start thinking about collecting actual data, let's think a little bit about what type of data do we actually want? And what I'm looking here right now is what we did for them. We did a so-called eligibility check, right? So once I start creating a new application here, I'll be brought to the eligibility check, which allows me to determine, okay, is that person even allowed to continue forward, right? And this is obviously different for each program, right? Some programs might want to determine, are you of a certain age, like here, for example, where the cutoff age is, I think, 16, so, and I think the top age is 22 years old. So within that range, those applicants are allowed to go forward and fill in more information. And then also a determining factor is, are they legally allowed to work in the United States, right? This, again, might be completely different from program to program. We've worked with the Hartford Housing Authority, for example, for their low-income housing programs. And what we saw there is that they have very specific programs that they offer to specific demographics, right? They want to make sure that they don't get hundreds or thousands of applications that they couldn't even approve because they do not qualify for that program. So that's the first step what we can do. And then also validation. If we get information, and we see this here, for example, the age is required, right? I cannot move forward. Let's say I want to save this form here, ensuring I cannot continue on because there are certain things that you require. In here, for example, the age is required. We need to answer legally allowed to work in the United States, and basically all those fields are required. I'm going to fill this out and going to move forward just to show you what the response would be if I'm ineligible. Let's say I am not allowed to work in the United States. I don't have a DCF case and I'm from Hartford. And I'll save. And in their case, they said you do not meet the criteria for applying for this program. Now, this has two benefits. Number one, the applicant doesn't even need to complete the entire application, which is quite extensive, if they wouldn't even qualify in the first place. So it saves the applicant time and they don't need to bother with that specific program. On the second point here is obviously you don't collect information that you already by default have to reject. So we call it kind of like a data junk, right, that you have to carry around because you collected it, you don't want to drop it. We prohibit that, right? And those rules can all be complemented. However, if an applicant, let's say, is 17 years old and they are legally allowed to work in the United States, we continue forward. And now we see, and I'll scroll through here a little bit through all the fields, that they collect, such as first name, middle name, last name. Greg pointed out a very important point, thinking about what information you are collecting. Good example was in the previous application, they asked for the age of the applicant. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is the age changes every second, right? For lack of a better comparison, but the date of birth would be a way better way to measure the age because, again, the age changes continuously. For me to understand what the age of a person is right now, I would have to see the context at what time the information was collected. So if I say 10 years old and this was 2 years ago, obviously now I can derive, oh, okay, the person is probably 12 years old now. Date of birth is obviously the better measure because I can always derive the current age and any age at any given time. So we switched, or we helped them to improve their form. What we do, and then I'll show you this here real quick. If I choose a random date, we calculate the age immediately here. So they still get that measure that they originally set out to do, but we collected it via a more precise metric, such as the date of birth. And I'm not going to go over the entire form because most of this is pretty straightforward. You have, drop downs for gender and so forth. But for the address, quite interesting. They had a lot of problems with people inputting the address incorrectly. Right? People forget specific numbers, they forget the zip code, or they omit a number on the zip code and so forth. So what we were able to do is, especially for people that have to type in multiple rows, such as street address, city, and zip code, you start typing your address, it starts suggesting you, and I'm going to use our Novus Insight address, that's 222 Pitkin Street. And as I start typing, you see the addresses get suggested. And those suggestions actually come from the United States Post Office. So it suggests me addresses that fit my address that I start typing. In this case, we see it suggests me two. This is the right one because it's a multi-tenant space. I'll click on it. It actually asks me what's the suite number. I'll type in 101 here. And as soon as I confirm this, the street address, city, zip code, and state gets automatically populated. And we see this little blue check mark here. That's the United States Post Office saying, yep, that is a correct address. We can verify this address exists. Now, this might sound, you've probably seen this when you put in orders, but that's a big difference to, just having a field that's completely unvalidated. And this ensures you that you have the correct address, especially when it comes down to employment. You want to make sure that you understand where the person resides and so forth. Making sure that social security numbers are not only stored safely, but also collected in an appropriate way, which we did here. Same thing goes for cell phone numbers. We're not ensuring the right format. We can even put on top sometimes, hey, to verify the cell phone number, we're going to send you a text. You're probably familiar with this when somebody sends you, when you sign up for an account, you have to verify your email address by clicking a link. We can do the same thing for cell phones, right? Verify, we send you a text, just answer yes in return, and we'll verify this. And this all happens in real time. Help them improve, extremely reduce their overhead. Now, with that being said, how do we do this? How many programmers are involved? How many Gregs, for example, need to consult for how many months? The idea here is, that you utilize a platform, the same, going back to why people are using Google Sheets or Excel, is because it's accessible for the administrators. They can use it. It's kind of like, something that they know. And the idea here is as well that, we use a platform such as what we did here with Capital Workforce Partners that allows you to go into a design view where we see all the fields that I just showed you. I'll scroll down here a little bit, where we see the first name. And if I say, you know what, I want last name before middle name, I should have the ability to maybe move my field up here, right? And I don't need to call somebody at help desk with some software company and say, hey, can you guys program this? No, I can just drag and drop stuff like this. If I want to rename a label, for example, and I'll move this back here for a second. If I want to, for example, say instead of middle name, maybe put in parentheses middle initial, right? I just click on the field, click modify, and then say, middle initial. I'll save the field. And now I have that implemented, and we see that that label now changed. It's the self-serviceability that actually Excel and Google Sheets gives you. That's why people don't necessarily gone.
Sorry, Herb. I just one question just came in when you're done talking about self-serviceability here.
Sure.
Barry asked, are there privacy concerns that exist when you store a person's name and age in a system?
Absolutely. I mean, to a certain extent, everything that you collect from a client is obviously, personal private information, right? And permissions and security play a big role in that, especially when we talk about youth, maybe school student data, right? Or social security numbers. So we haven't gotten there yet, but what we are basically looking at each field here, for example, that we define, and we see the first name, middle name, last name, all those fields, you can define who has access to said information once collected. And I'll take the example here now, let's say social security number. That's probably one of the most interesting ones. In this specific case, only providers will be able to look at this. So no public person will be able to log in here. So they all need to see social security numbers. But if I go in here and decide, okay, you know what, not everyone should have access to this, but I only want to define a specific group, let's say a system administrator, and they are only allowed to view it, but not modify it, right? I can either say, can this group view it? Can this view modify it? Or do they not have access at all? So the permission level not only go to the individual record, so such as an application, but even if you have access to an application, you might not be seeing the entire data set for privacy concerns, right? So this really depends on your processes and on your setup, what you deem available to specific individuals or groups, and that can be implemented. And that's another thing that Excel sometimes does not provide. I mean, you can, because you create another spreadsheet with a subset of the information, and now you have another spreadsheet, right, that you carry. Here you have the same type of information. Even if you share the information, let's say you share on record, if that person does not have the right permissions, certain fields will not be displayed. And we actually do this exact thing on this form. We, for example, see here, let me just scroll down here. There is something called qualified, or the application status. We see the indicator here that system administrators can edit it. This is what the pen icon here represents. And everybody can see that status. But the general public or the applicant is unable to change that information. We also have certain fields that are not displayed, for example.
So Herb, another piece here, intake through a form is great. That's one way of being able to interact with individuals, but sometimes there's situations where people may not have access to technology. or may have different levels of technology accessibility available to them. So some of the things that we've done with these intake forms has also been around text messaging and being able to text message the entry into these types of forms and do a kind of a prompt and response type scenario where we're getting that same data into a system like this, but through text message. And some other options are also available. Maybe you could just touch on those real quick before we move on to other types of collection.
Sure. And just real quick before Herb jumps into that, I just want to alert everyone we are in demo mode. You see the red thing up at the top, which means all this data is scrambled. So you might see some silly looking names. That's because we take our own medicine. We respect privacy. And so all the data that you're seeing here is scrambled.
That is correct. Going back to the different methods of collecting data, obviously one would be, you have a form, you create a form, you design it in a way so that all the information that you need to collect for yourself and for your funder is correctly on the form. But then sometimes you are presented with data, that or with individuals that can't access a computer. The good example was the text messaging, and this would be conversational. This is used, for example, for people signing up for a service, right? And you go back and forth and basically step through question by question, basically text by text. That's one additional way. Obviously, collecting data in a different way would be just having existing data, and this almost every organization that we work with has legacy data. No organization says, hey, we're going to change our process and we completely abandon information that we've already collected for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. So it is very important to have the ability to import and map the data that's existing into basically in whatever environment that you want to transition into. So we have, done this in the past, and I think I can bring up one of the examples here that we have with, just go over here, with one of our schools. This is a school in Rhode Island called Rice Prep. Again, the data here is completely obfuscated. Those are not real names. They presented us with a very unique use case. They said to us, we want to run a lottery with potential applicants that apply to our school. We have a certain amount of seats. We have more applicants than we have seats, so we need to run a lottery. The problem is we don't collect the applications. It's actually the state that collects the application for all the schools. So what they're then doing once the application process is done, they're handing that data, and yes, you guessed it, in a spreadsheet down to the Rice or to the individual schools, and they need to run their process on top of it. But not only that, once the lottery is run on the school's end, they then need to, first of all, inform all the parents or the students of their acceptance, or let people know that they are still on a wait list, for example, right? And then once that is done, collect more information on top of it, the so-called registration. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people went through this, signing up a kid for a school. You have a registration package that is quite substantial. Looking here at the checklists, media release form, medical health release form, and so forth. And this is a lot of information. Now we're adding to the initial section, which we call, the zero section here from the state. We're adding all those 11 pieces of large chunk of data, and that then the information collected after that then needs to stream out into their student information system. Now, before they did this all with spreadsheets, and the biggest problem that they had was obviously making sure that first of all, the data is accurate, right? We talked about that before, making sure that the data that you collect in the first place is accurate. We can do this with validation, and we did. And then the second thing is implementing their process, right? So this is the second thing that, people sometimes forget. Almost every program or every use case where you collect data serves a purpose for a business use case. There's some sort of process. It might be reporting. It might be, aggregating data to a certain point, establishing a certain subset of individual, et cetera, et cetera. So that process, in our case, was the lottery, right? We applied a process. We assigned specific individuals with a specific acceptance, then enabled them to communicate in an automated fashion with the parents. So the parents were actually notified. Again, this was also done manually with emails and so forth. And that's basically one way how data can stream in, importing, then also the ability to reach out to individuals to gather more information via intake. And then as a third part, also the integration with systems in an automated fashion.
So Herb, I'm going to just kind of do a quick recap over here because and switch back to the deck real quick.
Yep.
But so we talked a little bit about how you can develop your own intake process, and then how you can develop automation of collection of data and use external data as well and automate those processes. So that covers quite a bit on our first workflow sections over here, where traditionally people would use a Google form and then try and cobble together a bunch of data in that spreadsheet, whether it be Google Sheets or Excel or within a different system. So I wanted to pause there and ask the folks, feel free to go on off mute, ask any questions you might have here about intake and data collection and those workflows. Does something like this seem like it would be beneficial to you to be able to do all of this in one system instead of having to cobble it all together with people kind of behind the scenes? Feel free to go off mute, ask questions or comment on that, or throw anything in chat. I'll pause for a second here to see if we have any questions, because we're going to talk a little bit about reporting and data visualization next, now that we've kind of collected our data, done our intake, and now we're going to look at reporting in the next phase here. So does anyone have any questions on the intake and aggregation pieces that we discussed so far?
Doesn't look like there are any at the moment. And just so everybody knows, this slide deck will be sent out to everyone along with Greg's contact information and Herbert's contact information. This is being recorded as well. So we'll be doing a follow-up email with all the information. Thanks.
Yep. All right, so we've collected our data now, and we've brought in our external data sources and such. One of the big things that nonprofits also struggle with is visualizing and collecting and aggregating that data. So we've got our intake forms. We now have our case management, or if we look at the donor process, for example, we may have our fundraising system and our event system. Those two systems might be in different systems. So somebody goes to an event, someone makes a donation online. How do we then kind of bring those records together and determine, okay, what's the history of that individual who donated to our nonprofit? What are their interests? How do we aggregate that data? How do we see where they're from, maybe? And how do we see, in a visual form, kind of a heat map of what's going on with our donors, what's going on with the people we serve? This is something that a lot of nonprofits would love to see dashboards that they could present to their boards, that they could present to funders, that they could present to the individuals who are doing direct service. Herb has some examples of how we can take all of that data that would traditionally involve somebody diving through all those different silos, pulling together Excel sheets, making pie charts, and kind of mapping this to kind of data as well. He has an example, or several examples, of showing data visualization and outlining very quickly dashboards for executives, for board presentations, or even direct service providers. The one thing that we want to touch upon is when you're dealing with integrated data. So when that intake is happening through the same system as the data aggregation, we can get near real-time data, and in some cases, real-time data as things are happening. So if you have an event and you're collecting data and people are making donations online, you can see those things change in real time when you're using an integrated data system with integrated processes. That's something that typically takes a long time when you're trying to use spreadsheets to get that near instant data. So Herb, do you want to kind of show folks kind of how that works and show the visualizations?
Sure. Again, I think you need to stop your share. Thank you. Thank you. And all right. So Greg just brought up the example of the donor system. And again, this is in demo mode. We work with an organization in Jacksonville, Florida, the Jacksonville Speech and Hearing Center. And their biggest problem was very similar to what Greg just brought up as an example, that they had multiple different donation systems. One was tied in with an payment processing software, so people could go on a website, make a single donation via credit card, and this software then would store that information, the first name, the last name, the email address, and so forth. Then they had a separate system that would collect basically the same information in respect to events that the Speech and Hearing Center was hosting. So during an event, people would obviously donate there as well, and would maybe sign up for monthly plans. And so this system would then collect those donations. The big problem then occurred was, and I remember distinctly when we first talked to them, they said, like, well, we really like the reporting system of that one platform, but we really like how the other one lets us do single donations, but we can't really report on the entirety of our data. And they were more concerned about, hey, we just want to run, how many donations did we get for a specific month, independent of event or single donation. So what we suggested in our first assessment was, well, it would probably make sense to aggregate all that information as pure as possible in one platform. And this is what we're looking here right now. We see, there's about 3,000 records here. Those records are coming from different places such as Salesforce. Give Lively is one of those donation platforms, and then we have Greater Giving here. So those are 3 individual platforms. Now, the goal was not, as we looked at the data, not only to bring all those pieces of information over, and in the case of the payment solution, in real time, meaning if somebody pays with a credit card online, not only would that payment be processed at the payment service, but the data would be automatically pushed into the system. So there was no more exporting there, getting the data into an Excel spreadsheet, bringing it over into your Excel spreadsheet and running the report. No, it's in real time. And we see, for example, here, we have a $20 donation. This is done by a credit card, and this is a monthly donation. So somebody signed up to basically donate on a regular basis. But what we then really quickly saw was we have the ability to tie those donation records to individual donors. So that one step further, we realized, well, it would be nice to see, can we make a report to see which individuals donate the most, right? Or if you say, maybe which individuals donated quite frequently within the last fiscal year, but all of a sudden don't donate. Maybe there's something we can do on the outreach level. So instead of just creating, the spreadsheet here, and I'll dive into visualizations in just a second. We also, and I'll go here to the dashboard, we created the donor CRM. So this looks at the data kind of in a reverse way and says, hey, here are individuals. And if I click on one of the individuals here, and this is kind of our spreadsheet-like view where I can basically, do the same thing like as in an Excel spreadsheet, make all my columns wider. I can move columns around with drag and drop. I can sort by last name, first name, whatever you want to do, ascending, descending. I can also bring in other fields that we might collect by default. You have some fields that show up by default, but every user can basically create their own little Excel spreadsheet on the go. We'll dive into that in a little bit, though. We'll look at one of those records, and if we look at this record here, we see all the information that we have about the individual, plus all the correlated donations that this individual handed in. So we see all the informations over time and what the donation amounts were. So those 2 records are automatically associated with each other. And that was a metric that they just didn't have. I mean, they could do, and it would take them probably multiple weeks to, in manual labor, somebody figuring out, okay, is John Smith here, the John Smith that donated 3 weeks ago, maybe compare addresses. Well, we can automate those things, right? And once the record comes in, we'll see, do we have a certainty match of an existing donor? If so, we'll tie those together. So that's one thing, but that's sometimes not enough. And I'll switch back to a youth employment program. So those are our 2 examples that I want to use for right now. Our youth employment program was, again, Capital Workforce Partners collecting applications for internships for different providers. And what we see here is, again, we are back on this grid view, on the spreadsheet view. We have first name, last name, the provider that the person applied, the age, right? And then from which city they applied. Now, what happens quite often is they want to measure impact, right? What is the impact of our program on specific neighborhoods? So for example, the ability to say, how many applications did we actually get from Bloomfield? The ability to do that very quickly. is obviously something that you can do in Excel as well. So it's kind of replicated here. I can, for example, right click and say, okay, I want to filter this down by Bloomfield. And what happens now, out of my 5,500 applications, we're down to 304 because those are now all the applications that are from Bloomfield. And I might be able to say, well, that's interesting, but specifically we want to see how many female internships did we get. So I can just add another look for one of those females, say equals female. So I add another filter on here. So what we now have, we have all the females that ever applied from Bloomfield, right? So the ability to very quickly narrow stuff down, get accurate counts. And this is kind of like the day-to-day stuff. How many things do we get actually from Bloomfield? What happens also quite a lot is that somebody says, hey, can you inform us maybe on a weekly basis if we got any applications for a specific town? The great thing with a system like this, which you just can't do in Excel, is now that I've filtered my view down, first name, last name, the providers, right? All from Bloomfield, and those are all females. Let's say there is somebody working at the Bloomfield town. They want to know, hey, we need to know the female applicants maybe on a weekly basis. I can go up here, save this view, almost like, creating a new sheet in Excel, saving it, saying like, give it a name. So let's say all females Bloomfield. And this is just a name that I give to recall it. And then I can say, you know what, either I share it with an individual so they can check it on a regular basis, but even better, if the person doesn't want to constantly log in, I can say, you know what, I want to set up a trigger. And I'm doing this, by the way, all without, programming or anything. This is just literally clicking my way through. I say, hey, on a weekly basis, send me an email or send somebody else an email. I could send Greg an email, right? Greg does currently not have access to this system, but I can send him an email that lists out all the additional records. Keep in mind that certain fields that are where private pieces of information will not be shared. So it might be on your view here, right, in your columns, but if you share this with a person and that person isn't allowed to see that specific type of information, it would be omitted. So for example, I would have displayed the social security number here and I decide to share this with Greg. The social security number is not something that Greg would have access to. But this allows me then to weekly, or in an automated fashion, send out triggers to those individuals. So that's another way how we can do said thing.
So one of the things that helps with is reporting and the ability to automate reports. If you have funders, for example, that want to see data in a particular way on a regular basis, instead of putting those reports together, you can kind of, if your intake and your collection process is built out appropriately, that translates into automated reports that can be given to funders on a regular basis. That's fully automated. And Herb, one other thing that I would like to see in this here too is we talk about visualization a lot, being able to take and map out where we're providing services or where donors are from or those types of things. If we could touch on that real quick, because I know that we're running close on time here and I want to get to questions. So if we can just touch on that real quick too, that would be great.
Okay, so I'll show the traditional way and then the way that, you could even do better. So the traditional way, if Greg, for example, asked me, what's the distribution? Where do we have impact in Connecticut, right, for this program? Well, normally what people do in the spreadsheet, they would make a count, right, per town, for example. They see the numbers. Well, the next step would be that we say, hey, we want to see this in a chart, maybe in a pie chart. We want to see the impact. So the great thing here is that we don't need to go into any reporting mode for like a half hour. We can literally just look at our data in a different way. So instead of looking at this from the grid level, I can just say, hey, I want to see this on a chart level. I just want to switch over and want to display my data differently. And what we're going to do here is, first of all, we're going to choose the chart type, and let's use a pie chart here, for example, in the first drop down. And then we can select any of the fields that we collected, and I'll choose city from the contact information. And within, like 2 clicks here, deciding what chart I wanted and what field I want to display it in, we see the distribution, the impact that we're having, and we're seeing there's a huge impact with that program on Hartford, on the county of Hartford or the city of Hartford. And then obviously the individual distributions, East Hartford and so forth. Now, we have a different way how we can look at this, obviously through different types of charts, but because we're collecting the information of those applications via the United States Post Office, we're also getting geolocation information. So if I now switch over here to our map view, let me just go back here and we'll look at the map. Now, what we see here now is the distribution of said applications on a visual map in a GIS fashion throughout Connecticut. And what you see here is those are clusters, right? So clusters of applications, and the bigger the cluster is, obviously the more applications. And as I start zooming in, those clusters will start breaking apart. In this specific case, all the way down to the individual applications. So this is quite interesting because it shows you the real life impact for specific areas, right? Again, a different way of looking at the same data. And we didn't, really introduce anything new besides collecting the address. The same thing that you do on your Excel spreadsheet, right? But we can use modern technology to actually, use that information and derive something out of it, such as here with the map. Go on, Greg.
And one of the things that we can do with the map is if we bring in external data, for example, like school districts or bus routes, we can then start to do correlations with the mapping tool to say, I want to do outreach, but I know that transportation is an obstacle. How do I help connect people to transportation? How do I also assess, is my transportation outreach program working appropriately? Using external data and those types of sources and bringing it together in a system like this allows you that flexibility to build correlations and help use data to tell your story.
Correct. And it can also help you minimize, again, applications that you don't want to collect, right? A good example is, let's say we have a bus transportation program, but obviously this only makes sense for individuals that live within a specific district because those are the bus zones that are within that program. We can use, your address as a pre-qualifier. We can get at the geolocation information and correlate it with a specific zone on the map. And if you're in it, then you qualify. If you're not, we ran programs with different organizations in Connecticut in the past, such as the Crumbling Foundations program with the Capital Region Council of Governments, where they had enormous problems, determining if somebody's within a specific radius of a specific point in Connecticut, because they would then qualify for funding. If you're outside this, you're basically put on a wait list. Well, sometimes we had to manually review this, or they had to manually review this. So the idea here is using technology like this just cuts down on overhead, and you can actually focus on what caseworkers are focusing best is, determining, and contacting and basically managing the case on a personal level. Computers are not necessarily the best at communicating with individuals on that level. So that's where the casework comes in. But repetitive tasks, obviously that's where we want to cut down, and technology like this allows us to do that.
All right, so I know that we're up on time, Herb. We're at noon here, and we've thrown a lot at folks here, but we've taken you on a journey through intake, through data collection, through reporting, and visualization. And I wanted to take a little bit of time here with the time that we have remaining here. I know that we're over, but if anyone has any questions about this process, about the tool that you've seen, feel free to pop off mute, chat with us. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Ryan, I don't know if you have any closing comments. If you want to jump on, you can. But I just wanted to say, thanks to Novus, this was great. There was a lot of information there. And, once again, we're having our Building Bridges conference next week. It is complimentary, so feel free to sign up today, have your staff sign up. And I think we're good for the rest of the day. So keep an eye on our calendar. We have a lot more educational events coming up, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. And thanks again, Greg and Herbert.
Thanks all. Take care.
Thank you.